So today I'm going to be reading chapters 17, 18, and maybe 19 from The 14 Goldfish. There are 29 chapters, so we are getting close to the end. Chapter 17, Law of Friendship. Heads turn when my grandfather comes storming across the lunch court. He hates to do laundry and has started to borrow from my mom's closet when he's running low on clean clothes. Today he's wearing her hot pink sweatpants and Phantom of the Opera t-shirt. I can't believe this is on the reading list, he huffs as he holds up the book, The Catcher in the Rye. What's wrong with it? I ask. He starts eating my leftover chips. All this Holland kid does is whine. He should just get a job. I haven't read it yet, I say, although my mom talks about it all the time. Holland Caulfield is one of her heroes. You don't need to, my grandfather says. You should be reading the classics. I think it is a classic. Please, I highly doubt Newton wasted his time on this. Newton? You mean like the cookie? No, Isaac Newton, the father of modern physics. My eyes are drawn past him to the lunch line where Brianna is waiting to pay. She's with a bunch of volleyball players. It must be some kind of spirit day because they're wearing their team shirts and have put on silly face paint. Isaac Newton established the three laws of motion, my grandfather says, and points to the plastic fork on his tray. The first law states that an object at rest will stay at rest, and an object in motion will stay in motion unless an external force acts upon it. He smacks the fork and it bounces. Which, in this case, was my hand, he explains. Was it science that happened to Brianna and me? Were we two objects in motion, hurtling through space, and then an external force, middle school, volleyball, life, hit us? As my grandfather drones on, I wonder, shouldn't there be a law of friendship? That if you're friends with someone practically your whole life, you can't just suddenly stop and change directions without the other person? My grandfather's voice shakes me back to the present. And that is Newton's laws of motion in a nutshell, he finishes. You just learned physics, Ellie. Don't you feel smarter? I stare at him. Raj walks up to the table and eyes my grandfather. Love the new look, Doc, he says. Speaking of looks, Raj has a new piercing, a silver ball under his lower lip. My grandfather shakes his head. Why'd you do that to yourself? You're going to get a terrible infection. Have you ever heard of staph? It's self-expression, Raj says. Self-expression? Really? My grandfather mocks. I'll be sure to alert Harvard. Raj comes home with us after school. We sit around my puzzle at the kitchen table. My grandfather's been working on it lately. Sometimes, when we're watching TV, he'll abruptly walk over to the puzzle table, pick up a piece, and click it right in. It's like he's been thinking about it the whole time. My grandfather gives Raj an assessing look. Do you know any underworld types that could help us break into Building 24? Raj stares at him. Why would I know someone like that? I just assumed, he says, waving his hand at Raj's black clothes, the metal piercings. Raj gives him a funny look. Well, start thinking of ways to get in, he orders Raj. You're on the clock. Then he grabs a copy of The Catcher in the Rye and stomps out of the kitchen. Raj turns to me. Where'd he go? The bathroom. He'll probably be in there for a while. I heat up some burritos. It turns out that Raj loves them as much as I do. We settle down on the kitchen counter to eat and make a list of how to break into the lab. Our ideas are silly, mailing ourselves to the lab as packages or parachuting in. The strange thing is, it feels so cozy. I wonder if this is what it was like for Oppenheimer and his team of scientists when they were working on the bomb. Did they just sit around eating burritos, coming up with ideas? We need a name, I tell Raj. He cocks an eyebrow and I explain. Like they did with the Manhattan Project when they were creating the atomic bomb. We try out a few names. The Melvin Cigarski Project, the Jellyfish Project, the Raj and Ellie Are Totally Cool Project, and then Raj snaps his fingers. I got it, he says, pointing to his plate. The Burrito Project. My grandfather explodes into the kitchen, shouting, They closed my email account. Who? He's outraged. My email account in the lab. Someone closed my account. I can't access it anymore. That's a bummer, Raj says. But you can just set up a new email account, They're free. I did one for my grandfather. But my grandfather is beside himself. It's not that. All of my contacts are in there. The diver who found T. Melvinus. I don't even know his last name. All I know is that his name is Billy and he's Australian. Do you have any idea how many Australian Billies there are? Raj and I share a look. A lot, I guess. My grandfather fumes. I bet it was that Terrence character, the one in the flashy suit. He kept telling me to move my stuff out of the lab. Little upstart. Who does he think he is? I have years of experience on him. Decades. He waves the catcher in the rye in the air like a weapon. He's just like this Holden character, a phony. There's a beat of silence. Rye says, You're reading The Catcher in the Rye? That's a really good book. That is the end of chapter 17. Chapter 18, Degrees. Ben's taking us all out for dinner. My grandfather insists on wearing a jacket and a tie, even though we're going to a Mexican place. Quite the fashion statement, my mother says. What? Don't people dress up for dinner anymore? He counters. When we get to the restaurant, Ben's not there yet, so we grab a table at the back. I love burritos at this place. Real big spender, huh? My grandfather says, looking at the linoleum floor, the plastic flower arrangements. We should have just gone to a Chinese place. They give free refills of chips here, I tell him. Ooh la la, my grandfather says. How fancy. My mother glares at him, and then the bell on the door rings, and her face lights up. Ben walks in, wearing a dark suit and tie. You see, my grandfather mutters. He's wearing a jacket and tie. I'm sorry I'm late, Ben apologizes. Client meeting. The waitress comes over and takes our order. I get my usual, a burrito. My grandfather gets a cheese quesadilla, 3 beef tacos, chicken fajitas, and a side of rice and beans, and an extra side of guacamole. When the waitress brings our meals, my grandfather's order takes up half the table. He starts eating immediately, working his way methodically through his food. Ben seems a little envious. I was like that at your age, Ben tells my grandfather, patting his belly. Now I have to watch myself. My grandfather just looks at him and stuffs another forkful in his mouth. So, how are you liking your new school, Melvin? Ben asked my grandfather. My grandfather doesn't even look up. He's got the whole sullen teenager thing down pat. My mother clears her throat. I'm unimpressed, he finally says. I find the curriculum rather lacking. Ben looks taken aback. Really? Melvin was in the gifted and talented program at his old school, my mom quickly improvises. He's used to more of a challenge. My grandfather burps loudly. Melvin, my mother hisses. What? He says. Don't be rude. I'm not being rude. It's the bacteria. My mother looks at him. What? There are bacteria in your stomach that help digest food. During the process, gas is released, he explains. That's why you burp. And fart? I ask. He nods. Exactly. My mother groans, but Ben laughs and says, Seems like you're learning something at school, Melvin. Where did you go to school? My grandfather asked Ben bluntly. Melvin, my mother says in a warning voice. Let him ask questions, Ben says good-naturedly. I like an inquiring mind. I did undergrad at Harvard. I've been hearing of it, my grandfather says, twisting the ring on his finger. And I got my PhD at MIT. My grandfather appears vaguely impressed. Who do you work for now? A startup here in Silicon Valley, Ben says. We make video games. Video games? You went to Harvard and MIT, and that's what you're doing now? Ben nods and picks up a chip. My grandfather shakes his head. What a complete waste of degrees, he says. It's an incredibly artistic field, my mom says, defending Ben. Oh, Well, if it's artistic, then I'm sure it's wonderful, my grandfather says. My mother rubs her forehead like she's having a migraine. So, you've been married before? My grandfather asked Ben. Blinks. No. Any kids? Not that I'm aware of, Ben answers. I think that's enough, Melvin, my mother warns in a low voice. Just a minute, my grandfather says. I have one last question for you. Yes, Ben asks. Just what are your intentions? My mother's shout cuts him off. Melvin! Then my grandfather points to Ben's plate. With that last taco, my grandfather finishes with a smirk. That is the end of chapter 18, and we're going to move on. Chapter 19, Genie in the Bottle. My mom takes me grocery shopping with her. It's a little bit of a fight to get inside Safeway with all the protesters. People are always outside holding signs for some cause or proposition on the local ballot. They all jockey for space with the Pet Rescue Society and the Salvation Army. We get a cart, and by the time we're done, it's piled high. We never bought this much food when it was just the two of us. We could stretch a pint of ice cream over a week, but my grandfather will finish it in a single sitting. Your grandfather is eating me out of house and home, she says as we wait in the checkout line. At least you don't have to pay a babysitter, I point out. And he's driving me nuts with the whole trash can thing. I look at her. Did you know he has a fan club? He has a fan club? I nod. In Finland. She shakes her head in bewilderment. Unbelievable. Does he drive them crazy too? I like having him around, I tell her. I've noticed, she replies. By the way, there's a bunch of extra paint at the theater if you and Brianna want to do your handprints. I hesitate. I don't know if we're going to do the handprint thing anymore. My mom doesn't say anything. She just gives me a long look. Then she changes the subject. It's kind of funny that you're interested in all this science stuff. I hated it. Your grandfather used to drive me to his lab when I was a kid. What did you do? I ask. I washed test tubes. Sounds like fun to me. Were there any cool experiments? It was all completely boring. That was the problem, my mother explains. No emotions, no excitement, no drama. But I know she's wrong about this. There's a lot of drama in science. Really? A bunch of boring people standing around in white lab coats? They aren't boring. They're passionate. Like you're always talking about. She raises an eyebrow, and I want to make her understand. We were losing World War II, and Oppenheimer and all the scientists created the atomic bomb and saved the day. That's pretty dramatic, right? Or, she gives a grudging nod. Or, like with Salk, kids were dying from the polio epidemic and everybody was scared. Jonas Salk and this whole crew of scientists believed it must be possible to stop it. And so they worked night and day to find a vaccine. And they did it. Something in her face softens a little. You sure know a lot about this, she says. I guess I do. Still, those stories could use some romance, my mom points out. There's lots of romance, I insist. She looks confused. Really? Who are they in love with? Possibility. We load the groceries into the car and then I push the cart back to the store. I slow as I pass the protesters' tables, surprised to see my science teacher behind one. There's a sign taped to the table that says, Abolish nuclear weapons now. Hi, Ellie, Mr. Ham says. It's always funny running into teachers when they're not in their school clothes. Mr. Ham's not wearing a tie today. Instead, he's got on a t-shirt that says no nukes, a pair of shorts, and bright blue sneakers. Doing a little grocery shopping, he asked me, with my mom. What's this? Oh, I volunteer for this organization a couple of times a year. He puts on his volunteer face. Could I interest you in a brochure, Miss Cruz? Do I get extra credit? I ask. Absolutely, he says with a smile. I've recognized the mushroom cloud picture on the brochure, but there's another picture of a bombed out sitting next to it. The caption reads, Hiroshima, the war begins. But the atomic bomb ended the war, I say, confused. Mr. Ham gives me a questioning look. Did it? Or will it start a larger war? Because we're always going to be waiting for the next bomb to drop. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. I hear a horn honking. My mom's pulled up to the curb. Looks like your ride's here, he says. After I get in the car, I look back at Mr. Ham and he gives me a little wave. When I go to get breakfast the next morning, my mom and grandfather are already in the kitchen. I thought I told you not to put trash cans out, my mom says furiously. What? He says. You should be happy I took them out. There is a reason I told you not to do that, she says. Come with me. We follow her outside. The cans are next to the curb and the lids have been knocked open. Gross! Rotting, stinky trash has been strewn all across the street by some enthusiastic animal. We have raccoons, she narrows her eyes. Maybe your Finnish fan club can help you clean it up. Then she stomps off. And that is the end of chapter 19. Tune in next time for the rest of the book. Thanks for watching.